Welcome to Straight Up Now Tell Me, Christian conversation that's straight without a chaser. And first and foremost, Merry Christmas and almost a Happy New Year. I think we're on the cusp, right there on the timeline for a Happy New Year. So I wanted to launch by saying that, but also wanted to, start out by saying is that I, for sure, have not been put on earth to be religious. And certainly that's not a dig at all, because even when we think back to those persons who walked the earth at the same time when Jesus walked the earth, though the religious leaders there, be it the Sadducees or the Pharisees, those persons who were strict adherents to Jewish tradition, they weren't put here to be religious either, and they actually missed the assignment. And they failed to understand the assignment, and that, the assignment is to be in relationship with God and to make Christ known throughout the earth. So it is not to be religious. It is not, to be ceremonial per se, especially for the sake of being ceremonial. But this assignment is to make Christ known throughout the earth, to be in relationship with God, to be his advocates on earth. And so with that, I want to say that even, there's nothing new under the sun, and there are a ton of religions out there. So definitely not a dig to any certain direction. But what I want to say in the Christian space is that the indictment is to be Christian means to be hypercritical and unwilling to listen to others. And certainly that is not what being a Christian is about, by any stretch of the imagination. As a matter of fact, if I can get that out, as a matter of fact, the key thing, or one of the key things that we've been charged with doing is to, in all our getting, to get an understanding. And that applies, to everything, straight across the board that we do. And so, it's a principle of God. And so that part, we want to really stress the importance, of moving away and, moving into or being seen, I should say, in a different light, and how very important that is. But, along those same lines, and I'll get to our segment on today, is that we have, with the thought of getting an understanding, have done a lot of research today, throughout the last few months, not today by any stretch, but throughout the last few months on the topic of manifesting. And you might say, why bother? But one reason is that according to Cambridge Dictionary, manifest is the word of the year for 2024. And that is certainly, worth giving our attention to. So it means that they have done Cambridge Dictionary has done quite a bit of research on what people are talking about, or what people are looking for, or, researching throughout the year, and has deemed that the word manifest, again, is the word of the year for 2024. And so, that definitely worth, again, giving our attention to, definitely worth a conversation about, and not only for our purposes, but also to really to help people understand, who might be remotely interested in the topic, and even to help those who may be currently using manifestation to better understand the different approaches. And so that's our goal on today, and to really, unpack the whole topic of manifesting based on, two different schools of thought. One is manifesting based on the law of attraction. And so there are persons out in the world who actually have are huge proponents of this, and one being a young lady by the name of Gabby Bernstein, and we'll talk more about her in a moment, and also Roxy Nafouski, and I hope I got that right, Nafousi, I think is how her name is pronounced. But also there are people who are huge proponents, not so much in the law of attraction, but huge proponents of manifestation and manifesting based on science. And persons who fall into that camp are Dr. James Doty, and he is a neurologist, and we'll talk a little bit of a neuroscientist, and we'll talk a little bit more about his approach as well, and also about the thoughts of Mel Robbins, and she's also a huge proponent of manifesting based on science. So hang in there. We have a short podcast, but we wanted to delve into that because being helpful or being loving, let's say that, and being helpful to you we consider that to be our superpowers here at Straight Up Now Tell Me. And so we want to use our superpowers to dig deeper and to really talk about, this and all topics that we deem, that you may think are helpful to you. So to hang in there, like I said, we have, quite a bit of information we're going to try to cover in a short amount of time. But again, we invite everybody into the conversation. So if you have comments and things that you want to share, this is, our take on it based on our own understanding and based on a lot of research that we've done. But if you have things that you would like to share, please feel free to drop those down in the comments, or just reach out by any means necessary, because we certainly are in agreement to receive all of that from you. And again, thank you for joining Straight Up Now Tell Me and for going on this journey with us as we seek to unpack manifesting in at the end of 2024. So, first off, what we will say is that, the whole notion of, I guess, the law of attraction, we'll go down that pathway first, is not anything new when it comes to manifesting, or, none of that is anything new. As a matter of fact, it dates quite back to the 18th century, if you can believe that. And so there have been books on the topic, that mirror the books that we're currently, looking at if I can stop stuttering, right? And so it mirrors the books that we're currently looking at or discussing on today. So, and I'll back up a sec, because, Roxy Nafousi, I keep saying Nafousi is her name, right? So Roxy has a book entitled Manifest, the 7 Steps to Living Your Best Life. And then there's also, Gabrielle Bernstein, who we mentioned, briefly before. She has a book out, and she has several books out on the topic, but her latest one is that The Universe Has Your Back. And I believe that there's another one that was set to be released this month. But we'll dig and we'll explore that later. But I think and I'll try to post it here if I can find the title of that book. But they are both proponents of the law of attraction. And what my point is that is not anything that's new in town, so to speak. And that there were books that came out around 1889, if you can believe that. It's a book that's called Thoughts Are Things. And along the same topic, on the law of attraction, it was released, like I said, almost more than 100 years ago, by almost a century and a quarter ago on the topic. And then there was also another book entitled Thought Vibration and the Law of Attraction in the Thought World, and that one was released in 1906 along the same topics. And then there's Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, and that came out in 1937. And of course, The Secret, and it came out almost 20 years ago. So that's a little bit closer in and on that topic as well. But again, they all belong to older traditions. And so the topic itself is what we're trying to say. It's not something that's, totally, trendy or something totally new. It's been out for a while. And then a lot of the elements that are being discussed belong, very closely to, positive psychology. And that whole, theory of positive psychology, and that really says that there's evidence that having a positive mindset, it can lead to, and really having a better attitude, let's say that, can lead to more positive outcomes in life, and fewer relationship problems, like greater success and things like that. So those thoughts belong to the whole field of positive psychology, and also have been put forth by someone who's known as the father of positive psychology. Martin Seligman is how I'm going to pronounce his name. And so I'll press pause right there to say that, if you're ever in, a spelling bee or anything that requires a whole lot of phonics, and, you see me standing out there waiting to be picked to be part of the team, that I'm going to say, don't bother, right? That you do not want me on your team, right? In that regard. But if you are a math and science, guru, and you're building a team of folks here, hey, I'm your girl. And so that part, but so I fully apologize is what I'm trying to say if I'm mispronouncing Martin Seligman's name. But he is an 82-year-old, he's an 82-year-old psychologist, and he is known as the father of positive psychology. And I bring that up because, he has, I guess, 5 features that he says are crucial to our well-being. And one of those is positive emotion. And with that, he talks about, having hope, joy, amusement, interest, love, compassion, gratitude. They are all vitally important to our well-being. And so again, so those are some things that we may hear, folks mention when it comes to manifesting. And so again, he's been around for a while. He's 82, and he's been, he's contributed, for a number of years to the topic of hope, of being positive, and how, mindfulness and having a positive mindset can really attribute to your well-being as well. But, I'll say one other thing about that, and then, we'll get, move the ball a little bit further. But what I also will say is this, is that, the whole notion of manifesting, the term, is really something that came from the New Thought movement, which was a movement in the early 19th century. And it was made, I guess, popular by a gentleman by the name of Phineas Quimby. And he had a student named Mary Eddy. And she is, in fact, the founder, I'll say that, of the mother church of the Christian Science movement. And so they were around, in 1879, and, talking about manifesting and things of that nature. And again, that's kind of where the term originated from. And so it's not something, I think sometimes we look at it as something that became popular, since COVID, the 2020, the epidemic, the pandemic. But I mean, it resurfaced at that point really strongly, but it's been around, the notion's been around. So there's nothing, currently, I guess, brand new about the notion at all, right? And so what I'll say, though, about the New Thought movement and about Phineas Quimby and Mary Eddy is that they believe that, sickness originated in the mind, and that right thinking has healing powers or healing effects, and that one's ability to channel positive thought would lead to success. And so this will all make sense, I guess, in a moment as we talk a little bit more about, I guess, the current thoughts around manifesting. But the point still stands, is that, it's nothing new under the sun per se. And, even though it's trending, but it's something that has been around for a while, and that people have, really put forward, and along the lines of what I'll say is self-help. Along with the several self-help books that came out again in the 18th century, and also, those that we discussed on today, that we will discuss further on today. So, but anyway, food for thought along those lines. And so there's certainly, a little bit of history behind all of this. But what I will say is that, just to continue our conversation, that there has been a resurgence of interest on the topic since 2020, along that same time frame. And so with Roxy Nafousi, she is someone that I wanted to spend a moment talking about. And I guess what I'll say is, it took me a second to figure out, I'm like, why, did she hit the top of the chart with her book? And so I guess the thing that I'll say that's vitally important in every situation is that we learn about the topic, of course, but then we also learn a bit about those persons who are presenting ideas to us. And so what I'll say about Roxy is that she, I guess, ran in celebrity circles before, has run in celebrity circles for a while, and that she dated a young man by the name of Harry Styles. And so if you remember who Harry Styles is, the first I learned of him, he was part of a group called One Direction, which was a very popular British group that, hit the world by storm a few years back, and that he's still, he really, on the charts, so to speak, as a solo performer. But she dated Harry Styles and maybe someone else, an art dealer. And so she already ran in the circle. So that made a little bit more sense to me because I was baffled. I'm like, how in the world did she get her book and so, in all the celebrities' hands? But what I'll also say is that what she offers is that it's really about self-improvement. And when you think about it, I think that's very important to her strategy. And I'll pick up my notes on that too before we go too much further in. But she's an author. She's an advocate for small businesses, and she's a motivational speaker. And so along those lines, so she's doing quite well. But she was born in a different part of the world, let's say that. But she really was raised in Great Britain. And so we'll go there and with that. But she studied psychology at a very prominent, well, I consider Goldsmiths to be a very prominent university in England. And so there's some backstory to it. And I think what's been kind of put forth regarding her take on manifesting is that a lot of it equates to, mindset work and, therapy tactics. And so it made sense to me that she had a background in psychology, and someone who, she did an interview with Grace Beverly, who pointed that out. She was like, a lot of what's being discussed is, is like she said, is mindfulness, mindset work and, therapy tactics. And so that makes sense that there would be a tie-in and that it's kind of being repackaged, so to speak, and under the manifesting umbrella. But no harm, no foul to that. Again, I think what she is saying is that, manifesting is really, it comes down to, self-worth, right? And so that's kind of required. And she says, when we think of, to manifest, we're thinking about, whether or not we're worthy of receiving. And so we have to understand that, we're worthy of receiving certain things, and from her perspective, and that, she said, we kind of manifest, we only manifest what we think we're worthy of receiving, is what she said. And so along those same lines, she said, if you don't believe that you're worthy of success, or if you don't think that you're worthy of love, then you won't be able to attract those things into your life, into your own life, into your world, right? And so that thought came to mind, but I think from her perspective, it's more so about, reprogramming our subconscious, is what she says, in our way of thinking. So it's about reprogramming, how we're thinking in our self-conscious, and and to really reprogram how we feel about ourselves. And so that's that's an interesting take on it. And she said it's certainly not about making a wish. And waiting for for life to hand it to us on a silver plate, and she's come up with 7 steps, and so we won't go through all 7 steps that she's put forth of how to manifest, but just wanted to share some of her thoughts. And what she says is that manifesting is a lifestyle, and it's a way of conducting your life, so to speak. And so it's not, I guess, a practice per se, but for her, she sees it as a lifestyle. It says it changes your mindset, so it changes the way that you literally approach everything in life. Right. And so that way, she says, it changes the way that you approach, again, everything in life. It changes the way that you treat yourself, the habits that you commit to, in the relationships, your relationships with other people. Right. And so with that, we get it. And again, to me, I say a lot of it is self-help talk, and we appreciate that. And so by any stretch of the imagination, because when I look at what's being offered, and what I will say is that, it seems like everybody in the space is trying to at least put forward, a better way for us to live this life and to get to things that, would be helpful to us in life. And so I'll give them that, and again, I just wanted to talk with her real quick, very briefly, talk about her take on it, and that, and to say that, because I think, like I said, what's important to them, and don't get me wrong, we recognize that this is a huge money maker, and this, some people, $25 million money maker for some. And so we get it. There's some financial tie-ins to what they're doing. But I think that yet and still that the whole goal is to really to help make life better for somebody else. And we'll say that. And before we go any further, what I will say is that, you know, full transparency. You hear, and straight up now tell me, our position is always that life with God is better than life without Him. And that we should invite God in to everything that we do, to every space, every bit of work that we're doing on ourselves, everything. So we fully admit that, full transparency. And so we say it often that, life certainly we're more successful in life with God than we are without Him, and that He's worth inviting in. And so even when we think of manifesting, that's certainly what we will say, even on today. But, before we go any further, what I want to do is, and I wanted to put Roxy's take out there because she talked about self-worth, and I think that's the backdrop for a lot of what's going on here. But, before we go, any further in, let's say this, let's take time to define what manifesting really is. And I think each person, if you ask, each one of the persons we're going to talk about, they have a slight variation of what they believe manifesting is. But, by way of, I guess, positivepsychology.com, they gave us their definition. They say that manifesting is, is a belief system. It's a huge trend in the self-help and success industry. And that manifestation is the ability to cosmically attract success in life through positive self-talk, visualization, and symbolic actions. And I guess, for example, acting as if something is true. And so that's, by way of a definition put forth by positive psychology, and, by, Dixon is being quoted there, credited there. But they also say that manifesting involves, one's dreams, it involves manifesting one's dreams by thinking positive thoughts, feeling positive emotions, and aligning positive energy with that of the universe. And so that's their definition of it. But then, they're, like I said, we'll talk about it in, more specific definitions along the way as well. But another definition of manifesting is that it is simply a practice of thinking aspirational thoughts with the purpose of making them real. It says it's a technique that brings what you desire the most into your life through thoughts, visualization, belief, and action. And again, like I said, we'll talk about it, but as we move, specifically to James Doty's position, he'll redefine what he sees manifesting is, and the whole practice of manifestation. But anyway, so those are the definitions that we'll spring for, and we'll try to put those somewhere, catalog them somewhere so you can see them somewhere along the way. But with the thought of the first topic, again, being the law of attraction, and that whole approach to manifesting. We talked a little bit about Roxy Nafousi, right? And her position on what it is. And she has 7 principles that she says that are effective along those lines. But there's also Gabby Bernstein, who's another huge proponent of the law of attraction form of manifesting. And she's an author herself, a motivational speaker, a proponent of, to me, I'll say, of the Big Book. And so I think it comes out in a lot of her speech. And so a lot of her perspective is guided by the Big Book, which is, if you don't know what the Big Book is, so the Big Book is the book that's been used to guide a lot of the principles for Alcoholics Anonymous and some of the other recovery groups that's been found to be, quite beneficial in the process. But again, for Gabby's concerned, Gabby Bernstein, is that, a lot of what her approach, I believe, is kind of framed by the Big Book. And that right now, I think she claims she's not religious, but she was brought up, I guess, practicing Judaism as a youth. But she's, I guess, sees herself as a role model now for spiritual seekers, more so than anything. Right? So what Gabby Bernstein has put forward in the whole, I guess, idea of manifestation was a little bit harder to capture. And so, and I fully admit it. And it took me a while to really latch on to what she was saying. And I think the real reason was simply because she uses a different dialect, so to speak, or a different vocabulary in her approach. And not to say that, Roxy Nafosky did not, but I think Gabby Bernstein was heavy on the new dialect, the new vocabulary, and it took a while for me to really unpack that along the way. And so friends of mine have, been trying to help encourage me along the way. And I think I've caught on. But again, as a viewer, if you feel that we're saying something that we've missed the mark on trying to interpret what she's saying, then by all means, just please pipe in by any stretch of the imagination. But I believe that we're 99.9% there. So we always need, hey, your input as well on the show. But what I will say is this: before we can begin, I think we have to define some terms here. And so for Gabby, she talks about really, two things. She talks about living in high vibration, right? And, and showing, which is really, more than anything, I'll say, simply put, like showing up with the right attitude. So living in high vibration mode, and that also involves, and I'll definitely look at my notes on this one, really, she says being joyful. And so, and I did find it, thank you. But she's talking about by being in high vibration mode. And it's very important to the whole process of manifesting, she's saying, is that you have to be in high vibration, which means being optimistic and living in positivity, being, living with a sense of empathy and compassion, being emotionally resilient. And so that part is by being able to navigate through challenging situations with grace and with resilience yourself is part of living in high vibration mode. So you have to be in high vibration mode to really attract the things that you need to yourself, the things. And she says it's, also involves being authentic and really having integrity. And being willing to be your own self, to be able to be who you are without trying to hide, from the world, or to pretend that you're something other than, what you are or whom you are. So all these things factor into being in high vibration mode. And so it comes down to self-awareness and personal growth and being able to radiate joy from yourself, and to be, to really prioritizing your own health, your own well-being. And to being, in a harmonious relationship, so to speak, and to be really having a sense of humor even, and being willing to have creative thinking, so to speak. And so that is called being in high vibration mode, is what we'll say. And so that's very important to the manifestation process, according to Gabby Bernstein. And she says that, that also, that your vibes, vibrations are also important. And so we kind of looked into that and believe that points more towards your personality and your demeanor. So the vibes that you're giving off, or whatever the case. But then the other thing is that she talks about, your energy. And again, kind of floats back to your attitude, what you're bringing up into the room. And you have to, really fine tune your energy in order to be successful with the whole manifestation process. And so, in manifestation, to Gabby Bernstein, it involves, setting boundaries, and vetting who can be, part of your life as well. And really, and not so much seeking to be in control of things. But along those same lines, and again, those are our definitions of her terms. And so we'll use the terms, but please hold those and, those definitions at hand, right in front of you. But what she's saying is that that success involves showing up with the right energy, aka attitude, and fine tuning your energy, right? And so you have to fine tune your energy, is what she's saying, and so your attitude, and that gives you the power to create life, to create success, to attract more of what you want. So how do we, fine tune our energy? And she says you do it you do it with intent. So it's something that you set out to do. So you do it with intention, and the intention to show up with grace, and with possibility in mind, and to really to work on, I guess, on listening, by meditation, by adding prayer, and so you fine tune who you are, your attitude towards life, your whole presence in life, by listening to podcasts, by going to therapy, by having persons to help you along the way. She calls them spiritual guides, and to by reading books such as the ones that they put out there. So that's all a part of fine tuning your energy. I guess it's based on what Gabby Bernstein is offering, but it involves having mental clarity, and emotional well-being, and a positive mindset, and also having expectation, and thoughts, so to speak. But that's all a part of fine-tuning your energy, I guess your attitude, your whole demeanor, when you enter a space, as you live this life. And she says that is very important when it comes to attracting what you want out of life. So that again, she falls into the law of attraction camp, in a certain regard. But what she's saying is that the talent matters, right? That hard work matters, that your commitment matters. So you certainly want to have talent. You certainly want to, be hardworking and to be committed. She said, but all of that will fall flat if you don't fine tune your energy, your attitude, I guess your demeanor. She said it'll fall flat. It'll hit a glass ceiling, is what she's saying. So it matters. She said, what matters is, your heart, and your connection, and the energy that you bring into the room. Right? And so that's her take on it. She says, there's power in, fine tuning your energy and your attitude, so to speak, and in realizing that, that your vibes, your personality or demeanor, speak way more about you, speak way louder, than any words that you would say about yourself. So with that, she also offers, she says that, that when you are in an energy of high vibration, when you're radiating, and when you're optimistic, you're positive, and all those things we talked about what being in high vibration means. Since when you do that, she says the universe will reflect it back to you tenfold, right? And so, and she said it may not happen instantly, but it will happen over time. And so what I will say is that for Gabby Bernstein's, the universe, is the term that she uses, is actually equates to God. So when she speaks of the universe, she is actually using that term as a term for God herself, but then she's also not handcuffing anyone who may not, I guess, believe in Jehovah, so to speak, and they may believe in another higher power. She's not handcuffing them to using the term God, which certainly we would recommend on Straight Up Now Tell Me that we would all become closer to Lord Jehovah. And so we have no quorums about saying that publicly. But what she's doing is that she's saying that you can adopt the practices and put them in place, but then she's not saying that what you have to it's okay to believe in another higher power, and to look towards for help from another higher power, and that's certain in the case while you're manifesting, is what she's saying. So she uses the word universe as opposed to saying God, by choice, by her own choice. And again, hey, the thoughts and opinions of Gabby Bernstein are not the thoughts and opinions of Straight Up Now Tell Me, but we respect, what she's saying. And we are here to increase our understanding of the whole concept of manifesting, and to really talk and to present, the varying perspectives that are out there on it. But then what I will say is that, I guess a couple more things that we would like to offer from Gabby Bernstein's perspective is that, that she says that your energy is what attracts what it is that you want in life. So your attitude, your demeanor, whatever the case, that's what attracts whatever you want in life. and that your number one priority should be fine-tuning your energy, right? And so she's put that forward, and that she also has said that your power lies in the energy, the attitude that you bring forth, the energy that you choose to welcome into your life, and the energy that that you surround yourself with. Right. And so it's just as important from her standpoint to make sure that, you're showing up with the right attitude, demeanor, right energy, and that, the people that you're welcoming into your life also show up that way. Right. And that that the energy that you surround yourself with is very vitally important. And I guess to wrap it up, I'm trying to make sure I do due diligence in her regard. She has a lot that she's offering to share, is that she says, all the success that you desire, direct quote, is right there waiting for you as you begin to fine tune your energy, your attitude, and your whole demeanor, I guess, and it becomes a match for you, is what she's saying. So it's all there waiting for you, but you have to do some self-work to get yourself ready. So you have to, live in high vibration mode, or be willing to, and that's to live in positivity, being willing to focus on your well-being and to learn, all these things, and that will attract, will help you attract what you want into your life. But by the same token, what I will say about Gabby Bernstein is that she has offered up that, you don't have to do this by yourself, and that the universe has your back. And the universe, it's a translation for her, it means God. That she's saying that God has your back, right? Or your higher power, whatever you understand. If you're not, a proponent on the God, Jehovah, as we understand it, it's that the universe has your back, and you don't have to do this on your own. And so that is kind of the premise of her book, by the same title, that the universe has your back. But she says it's very vitally important that you be willing to surrender to the help that the universe is willing to provide. Right? And so it involves our being able to surrender to the plan of the universe, and not our own plan, but also our willingness to be able to let what God would say, the universe would say, God would let God's priority be that of our own. Right. And to trust, God in that manner, so to speak. So she says, the universe will help if you call on it. It can help you, and it's willing to, willing to be helpful in that regard. So that is yet another take on the whole law of attraction phase. And so she's like, you have to be in a state where you're attractive to be able to attract things to you. So you have to be in a state of mind where you're being optimistic, where you're being willing to do some spiritual development, so to speak, or where you've been willing to grow. And then you have to, it's about taking action so that you can align with the universe, in her case, meaning with God. So that you can take action so that you can align with your spiritual connection. And it's about taking action that's aligned with faith and courage, that's, with that connection, and really tapping into the inspiration behind your desire, to see how that inspiration will serve not only you, but also the world, right? And so that part, she said, you can co-create with God. And I guess she says co-create with the universe, and that we do that rather than forcing our vision to become a reality. So she talks about co-creating with God, and really about being optimistic, being in high vibration mode, about being, living with optimism and with positivity, being your true self, not being afraid to be who you are, living with empathy and compassion, and, emotional resilience, which is things that, we've talked about, just recently before. And living with self-awareness and being focused on personal growth. These are all the things that attract, will attract things into your life. And being authentic and living with integrity, and and radiating joy, being prioritizing your well-being, having emotional balance, being in harmonious relationships, and having a sense of humor even, and really being creative, and with creative thinking. And all those things are being offered as things that will attract the things that you want into your life, so to speak. with that, but not without you doing the work, or some work to actually, to move into that space. And that, with that thought, what I will say is that a lot of that kind of ties back into positive psychology. It's kind of where I was launching from before, and I hope that you guys agree. And if you don't, please, help straight up now tell me and me along the way into thinking, further about all of this. But I think a lot of it ties into positive psychology, and then a lot of it ties into faith, where Gabby Bernstein is saying, because you said the universe, which she knows as God, will help you if you allow the universe to, and if you're willing to surrender and to align yourself with God, then it's definitely be helpful in allowing us to get to where we want to be in life. And so with that, and she also says that, she cautions us about trying to control the situation. And so she cautions against that. She said, because, all of the control, all of the manipulation, all of the trying to make something happen will create resistance. And so, resistance, from the alignment, from the, the intuitive voice, she says, that's beckoning us all the time on the inside of us, and our connection to the higher power that's greater than ourselves. And, in her case, that being God. And so all of that, if we're trying to control things, or we're trying to manipulate a situation, if we're trying to make something happen, it creates resistance, is what she's saying. So, but anyway, so that is, I guess, sum it up in a nutshell, a quick summary of the people, I guess some of the most popular people in the law of attraction space. And so that being Roxy Nafousi and also Gabrielle Bernstein. And again, Roxy's thing is it's about self-worth and about really doing work in that regard to increase our self-worth, and about reprogramming our thinking that will help us go after the things that we want to go after. And then for Gabby Bernstein, it's about really showing up in the right way, and really living out in high vibration mode, our lives, right? And we talked a little bit about what that means a few seconds ago. So with that thought in mind, those are some things that have been put forth by persons who are in the law of attraction space, some of the most popular people. And so, but if you were to ask, I have to be honest with you, if you were to ask, maybe 10 to a million other people about, the law of attraction, it could mean, up to 1 million different things to other people. But those are the people, the perspectives of people who have done, I guess, quite well in this space. And I'm basing my perspective on what they have said about themselves, right? And so we did a lot of watching, of them online to try to learn their perspectives. We watched a TED Talk, one of the authors did, and really, watched a lot of interviews that they put on about their take on it. And that's how we were able to glean from them what, their take of it all is. And then I also would have to say that I suspect that there's been some growth in both camps. And maybe when they first started, manifesting was presented in a certain way, and maybe they've grown in their perspective and kind of like been able to articulate it in a better way, as we all do, or we all seek to do, including us, including me, right? So there you go. And so that is the law of attraction in the space of manifesting. And so I think a lot of the critics of that approach have been like, they are just like woo-woo manifesting, thinking that the universe is going to give them something, and that it's never going to happen. It's just sitting back asking for things and waiting for it to magically appear. And so I think a lot of the people who are opposed to the law of attraction, I guess, method, have been very vocal in that. But to Roxy Nafousi's defense, and to Gabby Bernstein's defense, that neither one of them are currently presenting themselves as being, as encouraging anybody, or even believing that you can just wish something into, magically wish something into existence without putting in the work. And in Gabby's case, without really allowing the universe, allowing God to help you know what that is, and to really get there. Right. And so for, and I'll just as a quick footnote, where Roxy Nafosi's take on what the universe means, I think she says that she sees it as an energy being that's out there to help. So I mean, she doesn't really speak vocally about, her viewing the universe as, as God. But I think here's what she says. She says, we're all, she says, the universe is an energetic force greater than myself, is how she sees it. Right. And so just to be clear on that as well. But hopefully you found that helpful in the space of trying to navigate through what manifestation is and manifesting according to the law of attraction is. And so again, according to Roxy and to Gabby, they don't see it as just wishful thinking that there's some work that we have to do to reprogram ourselves, our perspectives, our image of ourselves, are to really to be our best selves and to order to attract the things that we want in our life, and then to go out there and to do the work with God's help of aligning ourselves so that we know, I guess, what the best thing to manifest is, and what the plan is for that, and in Gabby's case or whatever. So it's to use the help that's out there to help you along the way. Right. So anyway, self-help, I'll say both books. But again, our position, and we say it openly, is that, life with God is better than life without Him. So if you were to pick up either of the books, so I think both of them have multiple books at this point. But just keep in mind, I say, we do everything. What we offer is that we ought to do everything under God's guidance and with God's help. And the life with Him is certainly better than life without Him, and He can help guide us along the way in every endeavor in our lives. Okay, so just moving forward, and we're trying to keep the podcast as short as possible. And it doesn't always happen that way, in full disclosure. But what we want to talk about briefly before we hop off is that there's another camp when it comes to manifesting. And that whole camp is about manifesting according to science. And so we'll talk about, I guess, two different people real quickly who are strong proponents of that. And one is Mel Robbins. And then we'll talk a little bit also about Dr. James Doty. Right. So real quick, what I will say is that Mel Robbins is a former legal analyst for CNN. And that she's also she's a motivational speaker, and she deals with personal development, and she is a podcast host and a former attorney and also an author. So she comes with I guess loaded gun, so to speak, and it has a very interesting perspective. But above and beyond, what I will say in summary, just real quickly about Mel Robbins, is that she is a huge proponent of the fact that we manifest as a method of training our brains, right? In order to get up and do something, to make something happen in life. So she's a huge proponent of the fact that you have to get up. You can't, when you're done, and you have to get up and make some stuff happen, right? You have to get up and do something. And so what I'll say is that she's quite clear that the wishing for something is not the same as manifesting. And what she says is that there are a lot of people who are confusing that wishing for something with manifesting. But manifesting is not thinking thoughts and hoping that they come true. She said thoughts become things only when your thoughts inspire you to take action and to get those things. And so that's the point that she launches from, and she spends a lot of time trying to make sure that all the people who are attempting to do manifesting or manifestation understand is that, no, your thoughts become things when you get up, when they inspire you to get up and take those actions to get to what you want out of life. And so she says that, the whole purpose of manifesting is to use science in a way to train and prepare your mind, body, and spirit to do the work to help you get to what you want. Right? And so she sees it as she often says, it's like training or preparing your mind, body, and spirit, to run a marathon, right? And so you have to do training before you actually run the marathon. So she draws that analogy quite often. She says that she sees manifesting as something that you use to prepare yourself and to inspire yourself to go take the action that you need to make the thing that you want a reality. So it's a tool that helps inspire you to get up and to do what you need to do to make the things to happen in life that you want to happen. And so that's her take on it. And she says, it makes you motivated and inspired to take the action that, to get what you want. And so she says, and often to, I'll hold that thought as well. But again, it's preparation to take the action that you need to take to get what you want. And so it's all about, doing the work, according to Mel Robbins, right? And so she said, if you don't do the work, it's not going to happen in your life. But she says the whole point of doing manifesting is that it helps you believe that something is possible, right? And so she said, you actually, she has a practice whereby she encourages you to see it and to actually feel it. And then she says that if you do those things, that, you'll believe it, that it's possible, and that will motivate you to go out and do the work that you need to do to make what you want to happen in your life, right? And so she says, there's science behind it. And she said, I think one of the things that both she and Dr. Dottie both lean on is the fact that, that our minds don't know the difference between when we're rehearsing for something and when we're actually doing it. Again, it's like, I guess the point they're making is that, if you're training for a marathon, then, there's, your body won't know the difference between, you training for it and you actually doing it because, both things, have the same, I guess, effect. But what she's saying is, and I'll make it quick as possible, is what she's saying is that, you're preparing your mind, body, and spirit to do the work again. And when you prepare to do the work, it removes obstacles that would normally stop us from doing it. And so some of the key obstacles that she mentions is that, we have negative self-talk that we, will quickly talk us out of trying to do anything. But if we manifest, if we, practice and train for what we're about to, attempt to do, it motivates us and it removes obstacles because, we've already kind of gone through and thought through some of the things that it's going to take to get there, right? And so she says that, I guess there's a lot to be said, she says, let me say this. So what she says is that you should not just visualize what the end goal, but that you should visualize the steps that you're going to take. So part of the process that she's offering is that you have to rehearse the steps that will get you to what you want. Right. And so there's a 5-step process, and I'll try to skip past that. But what she's saying is that you have to visualize yourself doing the step, taking the action. Then you have to let yourself feel yourself taking it. So actually, involve your senses in all of this. And the example that she uses is that she talks about, I guess, opening a bakery is one example that she gives. And so she says you have to see yourself, just visualization is part of this. So you have to like close your eyes and see yourself, not going out with your friends, tonight. And instead staying at home, and watching videos on YouTube about other people who have successfully done what you're trying to do. In this case, people who have successfully opened a bakery. So you have to see yourself, staying in, not going out with your friends, just visualize that. And see yourself watching a YouTube video, right? So you close your eyes and see yourself watching a YouTube video about someone who successfully, opened a bakery, by way of her example, has successfully done the thing that you want them to do. And she said, you have to, that's one step. And she said, you have to see yourself, another example of going to the library to get, a book that tells the story of somebody else who's done what you're trying to do successfully. And she says, see yourself, taking webinars, right, on the topic and tutorials and about people who've been able to raise money in order to do similar things, right? So she's on very practical things. She said, see yourself studying, like visualize yourself studying, Kickstarter campaigns is what she offers, right? Of other people who've successfully raised money, and to see yourself, talking to other people who've done this successfully. So visualize yourself doing that. And she said, see yourself taking a class on the topic, right? Visualize that. It's something that she also offered. And then she says, see yourself, staying in not only this weekend, but next weekend and working on the topics, working on the project that you're trying to go after. And see yourself even getting a part-time job in the business, and so that you can learn, what goes on behind the scenes, right? So she says, visualize that, and then feel yourself, so don't just visualize these steps, but feel yourself being tired. Feel yourself, not being able to go out with friends. It feels, makes you feel on the inside what that will feel like. Feel yourself getting up at 5 a.m. in the morning, she says, and going out in the cold. Just, how cold you're going to be, and how you're going to feel getting up that time of the morning, each and every day to make this thing happen. So you have to, visualize it, close your eyes, visualize it, allow yourself to feel it, hey, feel the cold, and that you're going to feel, just, whatever, put yourself in that space. And then she says, what you'll understand, or what you'll begin to understand, is that, that you can actually do it. You can do the work. So it's part of training yourself and preparing yourself to actually believe that you can do it, to inspire yourself that, into to knowing that you can do this. And then it's also, part A of helping you get up and do those steps, right? And so she said, don't just visualize yourself going to the library or listening to a webinar. Once you visualize it, you feel the tiredness, feel the fact that you can't go out with friends, that you're gonna have to study. It's all preparation. But she said, but then you actually, not only prepare mentally, you don't just train yourself, but you actually do the steps. Right, you actually don't go out with friends and you stay in and study, or you actually do the webinar, you actually get the part-time job, and so you can learn behind the scenes. And so she's making the argument that manifesting is preparation and training ourselves to actually go out and do the things that we need to do in order to make what we want a part of our lives. And so, but again, she cautions throughout is that don't just see the end game, but see the steps that are going to take, and then take the step, right? And then see and take the next step that you have to take in order to make what you want to be be a reality. And so those are tips by way of Mel Robbins, and she says, that's important to not only visualize what you want, but to feel it, because when you feel it, it puts you at the scene. It places you at the scene and allows you to, I guess, to me, my own words, to further think through what you're going after, right? So it adds a different element, but she recommends using your senses because it's science. That will help, prepare you, to inspire you to go out and get what you need to do what you need to do in order to achieve the things that you want to achieve in life, to be successful, to be a better you, whatever the case, right? And so that's her take on it. And so she says that, to be sure to also feel the pride as you do the work. Right. And so to put that, to take time to feel the pride that you'll feel from doing the work. And she says, from her perspective, she says, you have the ability to change the way you think. You have the ability to change the actions that you take every single day. And when you change those actions that you take, you change the way that you think, you change the way your whole life. That's what she's saying. And so that part, it's just, she sees manifestation as helping us mentally prepare to take the actions that we need to take and to do it. And I guess the final thing that I'll say about Mel Robbins, as we quickly run out of time, is that she says that, manifesting helps because in a lot of ways, our biggest obstacle or the biggest obstacle to what we want is always our own self-doubt. and, you know, and our own excuses, our own fears, right, and our own stories, the stories that we tell ourselves, right, the negative self-talk, that, you know, I can't do this, you know, I don't have enough resources, or I can't do this because I don't have enough, you know, education, I can't do this, because this negative self-talk. And she says that manifesting helps because it removes those obstacles that we put in our own way, right? When we allow ourselves to visualize, the step that we want to take, that we allow ourselves to feel what it's going to take, to do that step, the tiredness or whatever it's going to take. So we like, okay, we know what to expect. And then, we realize that we can do it, and we're inspired to do it. And then we take the steps that we need in real life, physically take the steps that we need to do to get it done. And so that part, and so she sees that, as a process of, again, a preparation, training ourselves to go out and get what we want, and to help remove the obstacles of fear that normally stop us, of self-doubt, the negative stories, the excuses that we come up with. She said these are tools. Manifestation, or manifesting, is a tool to help us remove those things out of our way, and to help motivate ourselves to go out and do the things that we need to do to get it done. Right. And so it's really designed to help us act, and to help us do the work in the end of the day, making sure I don't miss, hopefully not too many points that she's offered up. And she says certainly that wishing for something does not equal manifesting by any stretch of the imagination. Right. Nope, not in Mel Robbins, economy, where manifesting is concerned. She says really about empowering yourself to go get what you want. And about taking the actions you need. And again, she says, thoughts alone won't help you achieve the things that you desire. Not going to work, according to her point. She said, no, that's not how you achieve. She said, thoughts alone won't get it. You have to be able to eventually believe that you can do it, and then you have to do the work that in order to make it a reality. And so what helps us believe that we can do the work is really manifesting, and allowing ourselves to visualize it, to feel it, to really know that, that it's a possibility, to remove those self-doubts, and to kind of go into action mode, to go after the things, to be inspired to go after the things that we know we need to go after. And what she says is, emphatically, is that action is what will create the results, right? That you deserve and that you want in your life. So it's not thinking, it's not wishful thinking. It is actually the actions, according to Mel Robbins, that will create that. And so that part, and so she's one of the persons that we wanted to talk about, who are in the space of using science to really to manifest and to go after things that you want in life. And she talks about using, I guess, your senses, and it's neurology. I guess it's a whole neurological thing. I guess I'll say. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly too. But a whole process. But the person that comes behind her is Dr. James Doty, and he kind of furthers her thought, or she furthers his, however you want to look at that. But he is also a proponent of the science of manifesting, right? And so what he's offered, and I'll back up. So Dr. James Doty is a former neurosurgeon, and he's a neuroscientist, a professor of neurology at Stanford University. He's also an author who's written on the topic of, I guess, several topics, right? And then he's the director of the Center for Compassion and Research in Education, right, at Stanford as well. But interesting, he's also a military veteran, and he is a survivor of adversity. And I'll mention why I believe that that's important, that we factored that in, of childhood adversity. So he has been, he's very open about that, his experience as a child, and really being in an abusive household is what I will say. And I think it has framed out a part of his thought process. And so, and like I said, I'll say more about that in a second, and why that might be important to our conversation. Right? But what I will say is that as we try to unpack, I guess, the perspective of Dr. Doty, what he says emphatically is that there is no law of attraction. So, and he says also that that the universe, and I'll quote this in my own quote, my own way of saying it, that the universe doesn't care anything about you, right? There is no law of attraction because there's nothing out there, is what he says, and that he says that we manifest every day of our lives based on the decisions that we make. And a lot of what we're manifesting is based on, I guess, the adversities that we felt in our lives, and about some of the baggage that we carry from our past. And some of the experiences, I often don't want to say baggage because, I think it has a negative connotation. But he says that we manifest every day, whether we realize it or not, based on, the things that we carry with us from our past, be it negative things or we kind of, set things in motion based on the baggage that we carry as we go along. But for Dr. Dottie, he says manifesting is to take an intention, to embed it in your subconscious. So to embed it in your subconscious, So to take an intention, to embed it in your subconscious in a manner such that it has the greatest likelihood to occur. So for him, he comes from a neurological perspective. You take the intention, you embed it in your subconscious, and once it's embedded there, it says, it activates certain parts of your brain, right? And so that's from, I guess, his perspective. And he says, the root of the problem with manifesting, according to Dr. James Dottie, is that a lot of people have a vision for what they want and not for what they need. And so he offers that cautionary advice out there. He said, the problem for him with manifestation is that a lot of people have a vision for what they want and not for what they really need. And what we think, he says, is that we think as if we can just get more money, if we can get this, then everything's going to be all right. If we can get in to this space in life, then everything's going to be okay. But his point is that it's not going to be okay, right? Because we're going after what we think and what we want instead of what we really need. And so he starts off by he offering that bit of advice, and he says he recommends giving like going after what our purpose is in life. And so in trying to to manifest that what our purpose is in life, and what brings meaning in life. And so he talks about the fact that you have to live in something called heart mode. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a second, but that is, according to Dr. James Dottie, is the best place for us to be, because I guess it frames out our world better when we look at things through that lens, and we're really operating out of heart mode. But again, we'll say more about that. But he says, as he sees it, our purpose is to love one another, and that we are hardwired to do that, and that's one of the reasons why. I guess while we're here, so that's the purpose, and if we keep that in mind, then we'll go a lot further in life, and we'll be able to manifest the things that are needed as opposed to things that we want, right? And so but again, he cautions against what he calls woo-woo or pseudoscience manifesting, and he says that. That basically he doesn't care for it, because if you put positive energy out into the world and you don't get something back, then the proponent says, I guess, of the law of attraction, say that it's your fault, that you didn't do it the right way. So there's a lot of self-blaming that is factored into that. And so he doesn't really attest to that, but again, he believes that you embed an intention in your subconscious, and you move out from that. But he talks about actually doing how to embed that. And so the question is, hey, how do we do it? And so he says you do it by using all of your senses, to embed it in. And again, much like Mel Robbins, who we've discussed just briefly, is that he talks about like physically writing down what it is that you you feel that you need to manifest, let's say that. And then you read it silently, then you read it aloud. So it's like, are using your physical ability to write it down, and then you're using your voice to say it, where your eyes to read it silently, your voice to read it aloud. And he says that you have to calm yourself and quietly visualize it, and that you do this process over and over again. And then he says, that way it becomes embedded into your subconscious, and then it activates a certain part of your brain, and to help you along the way. But I think the other thing that he points out that's worthy of mentioning today is that he says, why do we have trouble believing that we can accomplish something? And he gives us a reason. He says, a lot of times we have trouble believing that we can accomplish something is because of this thing called a default mode network. And all of the negative stories, again, that we've told ourselves, all the negative self-talk that we've repeated over and over again. And so we have this default mode network that we fall back into, and that keeps us from moving forward and really being able to achieve the things, to manifest the things that we want to in life. But what he suggests is that, simply, we tell ourselves another story, right? And so, and that, we over and over again, if necessary, that, what, beyond all the issues that we've had, that we can accomplish that. So we have to tell ourselves a new story and allow that to be embedded into our lifestyle as well. But he says that, the negative self-talk is not going to go away. But in the face of that, we have to let ourselves know that we're going to be okay, right? And so we understand that, there's negative self-talk that, that has been a part of who we are, and it may even continue, but we have to say, hey, in spite of that, what I feel it may be a challenge, or may have been what I've been through or whatever, I can still, get this done. And again, he says, a lot of the negative self-talk comes from things that we've gone through in our childhood, some of the baggage that we've carried. But then what he recommends is that we have to be compassionate with ourselves, for ourselves, to have compassion for our own selves in that regard. And so that's his thought on it. And again, he's like, you have to embed the thought into your subconscious, and you do it by using your senses, he says, by writing it down, by reading it silently, what you've written down, and by saying it aloud, you're hearing yourself say it aloud, and then by calming yourself and visualizing it. And then you do this over and over again until it becomes embedded in your subconscious. And then he also agrees with Mel Robbins that, once this has been embedded in your subconscious, you still have to get up and do the work to get it done. But again, he's a fan of, visualizing, what you need as opposed to what you want. And that he also recommends using, not only visualization, but also using mindfulness practices. And so what those are, it's like really, I'll say, like living in the moment and being able to notice things around us, to take a deep breath in the moment that we're living in, and say, to pause and to really, revisit our intentions. What's going on, and to take a moment to do mindfulness practices. He also says to employ relaxation techniques. And to, in focus techniques, so we can focus on the things that we want to go after in life, or that we need to go after in life. And that, we deal with the negative self-talk, which we talked about, moments ago. And that we look at the world through a lens of compassion, right? As opposed to, looking at the world without that compassion. And so, again, we talked about, how he encourages us to live in heart mode. And for Dr. James Dottie, what that equates to is that, we have to have an openness about ourselves, and live in a space where generosity matters, and where, caring and love, matter. And so that's living in heart mode. And he recommends that. And he says, for you to maximally visualize, you have to be relaxed, you have to be calm, and you have to not, again, to look at what you want, but to look at what is needed. And he says, that is the difference for a lot of people, because people tend to visualize what they want and not what they need. And then again, they think that, having the possession or whatever was going to cause them to be okay. And again, what he says is that, but the problem is that, having that won't make it okay, right? And so that's his perspective on it all, on all of it. Again, he recommends telling yourself a new story. And I think he says to do it, where there's negative self-talk. He said, tell yourself a new story. He says, and you do that by understanding what you have already manifested by the negative self-talk. So be conscientious of the fact that you've already put some things in play by, repeating the negative self-talk, and by having that in your life. He says, and understanding that the difference between what you think you want and what you need is vitally important. Again, so this is how, you tell yourself a new story. And he says that the greatest way to manifest is to have yourself centered and to look through the lens of how can I be helpful. Chase purpose and to live in what he considers like heart mode. In that regard. So he says, look through the lens of not what I want, but how can I be helpful, and how can I chase purpose and meaning, and then to seek to manifest that into your life. And then he says, realize that that the negative self-talk has created what's called a limited belief system that says, it's like a prison that we only believe that we can achieve certain up to a certain level or certain things or small amounts because of the limited belief system that we've allowed to develop by the negative self-talk that we have. He says it's a prison that we created for ourselves, and that we have to work to really set ourselves free from. But again, he says, you have possibility when you are able to interrupt the negative belief system. Right. And so I'm sorry, I'm definitely reading him. I don't want to misquote. But he says, you have possibility when you interrupt the negative belief system and are able to look at the lens of possibilities. And if you have negative self-talk, he said, that goes out from you, then, we have to change how we look at the world, is what he's saying. And so one thing he says is that, when he himself changed the way that he looked at the world, that the world changed how they looked at him. He said he saw that because more people reached out to him, and that the fact that he was open to them reaching out to him, and then he was appreciative of them reaching out, and then he was also thankful. And so he says, when I changed how I looked at the world changed how it looked at me. And then he learned how to live in heart mode, and to really to live with compassion in mind, and with love in mind. And so, he talked about how to get there and how to drop down into heart mode. He said, you have to find a calm place where you can sit and kind of shift your focus or whatever. And then he said you can do breathing exercises to help you calm down, and do, mindfulness practices, which we just talked about moments ago, being, cognizant of your surroundings and what's needed. And he said that you look at the things that you've already manifested in your life. And so this is how you drop into heart mode, he's saying, and then you reflect on that, and then understand that, that attachment and the importance of not being attached to the outcome is vitally important when you're manifesting. And what he's saying is that, you have to, there's nothing wrong with trying to manifest, what you need, but don't be so attached to it that if it does not happen, that, it's devastating, right? He said, no, be invested, manifest, go through the process, but don't be so attached that it will disrupt everything that you have going on in life, should it not come to pass in a timely manner or not at all, right? So don't be so invested, so attached to it, that you can't function after that. Again, he says, should it happen? Yes. Will it happen? Maybe, or maybe not. And if it doesn't, that, know that you're still okay. And that's the secret to you being able to manifest successfully. Again, he says, it's all about intention, goal or desire, and not something that, it's not something that we get lost in, is what he's offering. The whole manifestation process, and we don't become, pathologically focused on trying to get this thing to come to pass. That's what he's offering. He said, no, please don't do that. But it's something that, that is needed. It's a goal that we have in mind. It's an intention that we've embedded in our subconscious in order to help us, know that we can do it, and to think through how to do it. But the thing, and then so that we can go out and take the actions, but that we're not so focused on it that, we become, a slave to it, or succumb to the fact that if it doesn't happen, it's devastating to our lives. And so he offers that up. But what I will say a little bit further about Dr. James Doty is that he says that regardless of circumstance, that we have or even our situation in life. He says we each have the ability to improve the life of at least one person every day. And so it'd be it by way of a hug, or just saying hello, or by sharing a meal with someone, or by doing anything. He says, but what he offers is that when we can look at the world through that lens, and how we can help at least one person every day, right? That he says that that is a habit that puts you in the mindset not only to serve, not only service, but to help others. And it also helps us along the way. And so it helps to put us in the right, in heart mode, so to speak, and with the right mindset as we're trying to manifest things here on earth. He says it's simply because it gives us the power to see the world through a different lens and to be able to manifest whatever our intention is, right? And so he says, that is the power of our humanity, is what he's offering up as it relates to connecting with one another in heart mode. So Dr. James Doty, he's a fan of manifestation, but only what he's saying is that to manifest, what is needed and not what we want, and to live in heart mode where, we are looking to not only at ourselves, so to speak, but looking out for others along the way. But that is, he has a thought of manifesting in the lane of compassion, which I say is very interesting in light of the fact of how he was raised. And so it makes some sense, I guess the other piece of his life, because Dr. James Doty is actually an atheist and a fully admitted atheist. But it makes sense, I guess, at least to me, when I think of children who have gone through, I guess, horrific things in childhood. And so I think the thought is a lot of times, where was God when I was going through that? And I think it can be maybe challenging a little bit for persons who've gone through, very difficult things, who may have wondered, where was God when I was going through that? For them to really grab hold of the love of God and to know the love of God that does exist. But what I try to share, and what I would also share with Dr. James Doty in this situation, is that, when they asked where was God, God was there, actively working to try to convince the person who was about to do something harmful to you, to not do it. Right, actively, trying to steer them off course, getting them not to do it, because the actions that we take have, effects on other people, right? And so in that case, and so that's something horrific that that nobody would want a child or anybody to go through, and certainly something that God did not want us to go through. So he's there actively trying to turn the other person who's about to do something harmful in another direction. Now, when we don't yield, we have to understand that, there's fallout, not only in our own lives, but in the lives of others. And in this case, the things that happened to Dr. James Doty at the hands of his dad have obviously had lasting effects, I would say. And so there's no judgment in that. And I just wanted to be clear. I said, there's plenty of people in the in the space who are talking about how to manifest, and some people, I guess Gabby Bernstein, who's inviting God into the equation, and some people who are doing completely self-help approaches, and some that agnostic approaches are even that. Like I said, Dr. James Doty, who's openly admits that he's not relying on the universe, aka God, for anything, because he doesn't believe that God exists. And so I just wanted to share that so that we can openly understand that, there's a lot that's been said about manifesting. And as we seek to move into a new year, there's a lot that we have to be cognizant about, and understand that, again, that life with God is better than life without him. So even if we seek to, put into practice any of the self-help tactics that are offered by way of any of the authors we've talked about, any of the persons we talked about. Don't go on any journey without, the guidance of God. And so I'll say that, and so really, in real talk, I said, because life with him is better than life without him. And so what I'll say is to let him cook. Let him do what he does best. And so let him guide. He is our guide. Let him do his thing so that he can help us along the way, because, we are, again, a prized possession of his, and he wants to help us think through, the process, think through the avenues. Is it something that's needed? If it is something that can be beneficial to me, God, show me how to, to walk this thing out, who to, glean from, how to look towards you to go after the things I want to have in my life. And so definitely invite God in is what we will say in that space. And so when we think of all the self-help authors that we've encountered, previously, I think of, I guess there was a book out once upon a time, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. There was this, oh my goodness, the habits of, oh my goodness, I can't think of that one. What else? Oh gosh. So we'll say this, that Stephen Covey and Les Brown and some other authors have put some books out into space. Who Moved My Cheese was another one that was a self-help book. And so, there's the 7 habits of, I can't think of it. It was very popular of successful people, whatever it was called. But those, all that to say, there's been a lot offered in the self-help space. But, even with those authors and those, I guess, tidbits of advice, we always have to invite God in to keep us on the rails. And so, it can be helpful in some regard, but then we have to guard, I'd say, and just, from our perspective here, it's Straight Up Now Tell Me, just to know that we have to make sure we don't get off the rails, so to speak, in those regards, right? So what we offer you today is hopefully the fact that we're listening in that space, and that we're willing to hear the perspectives of others, and really to fully put them to use where they are, we see them as viable in the Christian space. And so hopefully some things that we've shared today have been helpful to you from the different perspectives. Again, we've talked about Roxy Nfosi, whose name I'm still struggling with, Gabby Bernstein. We talked about the perspective. They both came from the law of attraction space where manifesting is concerned. And we've also talked about manifesting based on science from perspective offered by Mel Robbins and Dr. James Doty. And then certainly there are other persons who are speaking in that space. And so we just need to know who we're listening to and what, I guess, perspective they're bringing to the conversation, so that we can glean from them, yes, where there's opportunities to glean, but that we can also know that, their perspective may be guided by, something else other than, what we might want to be guided by in that space. Right? And so that's what I will say. But then a final word, too, is that certainly there are people who, like I said, they hop on the bandwagon and they put thoughts forward about it, and so just keep that in mind about what you lean. Do your homework, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It took us a long time to research all these people, and not to say that we capture perspectives from everyone, but it took a while to research, to understand, and in all our getting an understanding, it took us a while to even begin to understand all the perspectives and to learn what was valuable, or what we deemed as valuable, and that, from the conversation, and what we may have been willing to leave on the table, so to speak. But keep that in mind, and also keep in mind there are other people who are in the space always, who are offering perspectives, who may be using some of the good, but they also may have different agendas as well. And one thing I will say is that I had a colleague and a good friend mentioned that there's persons who, I guess admittedly, well, let's say this, one of the reasons why we don't use titles as Straight Up Now Tell Me is because titles hold certain connotations with them. So if I were to say, hey, we said, we're a Grinch or a Scrooge, right? There's certain connotations that come with it. And so there are persons out there who call themselves witches. And so they are employing some of the tactics of manifesting as well. And very interesting. And I won't say a lot about it because I just so that there's an awareness out there regarding it. And not to say that everything they're offering is inappropriate or bad. But it was news to me, right? So, but all that to say, and that, I guess in the current year that we're standing, but all that to say, please keep in mind that you know who we're listening to, and then why they're offering what they're offering, and you know if and where we can glean, where appropriate, and where it's pleasing to God, where we can glean from certain persons. Let's seek to do that, and if we can't, we find that you know it's you know an audience that we don't need to be a part of, you know, please evaluate that as well and keep that in mind. And so, you know, not to derail the whole topic of manifesting, but I just wanted to mention that little piece at the end because I think it's worthy of bringing on board, even though, like I said, it's not the main topic or the main persons that we were discussing. But also, please keep in mind that, again, you know, there are people who may do manifesting light and may really just feel like they can will things into existence without doing any of the work required to put the things into practice or to get up and to make things happen. And so there's probably a camp there, but that is certainly not the perspective as I know it from the persons that we put forward today as we seek to understand what, you know, the popularity of manifesting and what manifesting really is. And so that is certainly not, you know, anything that we would recommend as straight up now tell me. We definitely see the need to invite God in and to also do the work, to do the things that, you know, need to happen, and to let God be our guide as we seek to train ourselves or to prepare ourselves to do the work that needs to be done, and to also put God's plan into action, right? And we have to know what that is. In the Christian space, we have to know what that is in order to get it done. So please keep that in mind. And again, like I said, there are certain concerns about the whole manifesting process, but I think a lot of it comes from not listening to what people are saying about themselves, maybe, or either, you know, people being in different camps. But I mean, I think the caution is that, you know, it can cause us to ignore reality. And it can also lead to persons feeling ashamed if things that they've, you know, publicly said that they were, you know, hoping to manifest don't come to pass. But with that, you know, we jump back to Dr. James Doty's caution is that we not be so pathologically invested, attached to the outcome, but that, yeah, we seek to manifest it. And if it happens, then great. But if it doesn't, you know, it's not something that's going to derail everything off the table. And when we think about it, and I'll say one other thing, because it came across my radar as far as like trying to restore relationships with other people to, you know, by manifestation. And so I think that the caution is that we have to respect, you know, the choices that people have made, right? And so yes, we can show up as our best selves, right? And that is attractive in and of itself. But then we can't be so, I guess, pathologically attached, as Dr. James Doty would say, that if they have decided to move on, that, you know, we can't, you know, we lose all hope, and then, you know, we fall into despair. And so anyway, so that's been a hot topic, a hot button that I think every critic of manifesting has brought to the surface. Of people are trying to reestablish relationships and to manifest persons in their own lives. But again, like I said, you know, being our best self is attractive. There's no harm with that, you know, no harm, no foul. And living in high vibration mode, as I guess Gabby Bernstein would say, where we're being optimistic and working, you know, caring about our own well-being and being positive and, you know, learning and growing and all this other stuff, then there's nothing wrong with that as well, as we seek to, you know, to go after the things that even, you know, that God would have us go after. So there's no problem with that, with studying to show ourselves approved, so to speak. Certainly no problem with that, and realizing that, you know, hey, you know, what we think in our hearts really matters, right? And so that part, you know, because it'll bubble us to the top. And so, you know, understanding our own self-worth, there's no harm in that as well. So keep all those thoughts in mind, and that, you know what, we are expectant and hopeful, especially in the Christ space, because of who God is. And so there's nothing wrong with being, hopeful and expectant in that regard. But knowing that even if it does not happen, that we are still good in God, in Jesus Christ. Trust me. And so we'll hold that thought, and I think we'll do well in this space. But then, the other cautions, real quickly, is that, sometimes it's said that, manifesting kind of overestimates our own individual agency, our own ability to make things happen. And so I would agree with that if we're not careful. But then again, what we'll say is to invite God into the situation, and to ask for God's guidance, for His help, to help us know what to go after, and we're not doing it in our own strength. And so we're not saying that, we can get out there and get everything we want on our own. No, I would say, you use the self-help techniques, but also, again, let God be who He is in our space, right? For those of us who believe, right? And so keep that in mind. And then, another caution real quick is that we have to factor in is what, people who are, I guess I won't say critics, but people who are concerned about the whole notion of manifesting, what they offer is that we have to factor in the economic and social structures in which we live. And so we have to factor into things that, like nepotism, I guess sexism, racism, whatever the case may be. We have to factor those in, and to not ignore them, and to not be escapist, so to speak, and doing what they would call daydreaming about, what we hope to bring into our lives. And then we have to also be careful not to do victim blaming. So if someone's, is hoping to manifest something, we have to not victim blame them. Say, hey, you're not getting it because you're not doing it right, or this, that, and the other. But also not to be victim blaming where our own selves are concerned. So again, those are cautions and statements, are stated concerns, I'll say, that have been offered regarding manifesting. And so those are things to keep in mind. And, they say, some people argue it's a trend and that there's no empirical evidence that it works. But again, I would argue that, hey, it's a self-help technique that we can employ. Should, God, nudge us to. I mean, hey, but whatever we do it with God and not without Him. And that we certainly don't, do what people are concerned about, some say abusing faith, right, in that space. So no, I don't think that's even, it is a possibility, but that's certainly not a goal as well. Right, so anyway, keep that in mind. But again, what we'll say is that, God is who He is in our space, and again, He allows His sun to shine on all of us, and He sends rain to nourish all of us. And there's not a person on this planet that He does not care about, and that there's not a person on this planet that He is not availing Himself to factor Him in as we consider manifesting or doing everything in life. So again, let Him cook, let Him do what He does best, right? And let what He desires to do. So, to shine His love upon us, to help us along the way, to bring us into a knowledge of Him through His Son, Jesus Christ, and also for us to live in relationship with Him is always the goal that He has in mind, that, we can be His hands and feet on the earth, and that we can have a loving relationship with someone who loves us beyond measure. So thank you again. That is our topic on manifesting, and there are certainly 1,000 things that we we could say that we had tried to hop off the podcast without saying. But again, for those of us who are even in the Christian space, what I'll say is that something that has been offered to us is that, in everything we do, whether we call it manifesting or not, is that we have to be in connection, in concert with God. And so, because if we're not, then we can find ourselves, as something I guess that Mike Todd, who I quote often, has pointed out to us, is that we can find ourselves like waiting aimlessly for something that God is not in. And that it's not going to happen because God is not in that. And He knows that, hey, it's not the right thing for us, that it can set us on the wrong track or derail us off the track. But you know what? I think one thing that Mike Todd said is that, it's your idea, or it was your plan, or that it was your mama and them plan, as he says, right? And that it's not going to happen because it's not something that God commissioned, or really ordained for your life, or really intended for your life, or really has set forward for your life. Is a way, I guess, a easier way to hear that. But that, that God is not committed to the promises that we've made ourselves. And so that part, that we can possibly find ourselves hoping in something that will never come to pass. So keep that in mind. And that's, I guess, my last comments for those persons who are actively believers in Jesus Christ. So even if we are not considering manifesting, that the things that we're hoping for and believing for, God has to be our guide in that as well, right? And really we have to surrender to what he says in that regard, because he knows a lot more. I always say he sees a lot further than we can see, because he has an aerial view that we ourselves do not have. So keep that in mind. And again, that's just a special note for those who are believers. Again, hopefully, this has been a beneficial conversation on manifesting, albeit a longer one than I had hoped. But again, hopefully there's something in there that's helped us along the way as we seek to go into a new year, and even to live out the balance of this year. So again, we are definitely here at Straight Up Now Tell Me, using our superpowers to do something loving, as and to be helpful to you, which is always our goal, and to really learn ourselves by way of having an open and an honest Christian conversation here. It's Straight Up Now Tell Me, where we do Christian conversation that's straight without a chaser. So thank you, everyone, for being a part of the podcast today. Again, if you have feedback for us, please, we are always desirous of it, and of an open conversation, of a dialogue with you on the topic of manifestation, on every topic that we put forward here at Straight Up Now Tell Me. So thank you again. Happy New Year. And we look forward to continuing our conversation with you as the days go forward. You remain the same man. Wonderful is your name.